what happens now when we actually start to lend some money. So in the old example, if someone had a project that required, let's say, 300 gold pieces, we would actually give them the 300 gold pieces. We would actually take it out of our vaults. They would use that 300 gold pieces to hire the people or buy whatever supplies they needed to actually do their project, and then those people maybe would redeposit it back in the bank, and that process would continue. What we're going to do now is try to think out how could we do this without the bank with ever having to give the gold out. One, it's just a safety concern, and then the gold is just not an easy thing to transact with. You don't, if someone, wants to sell something worth half a gold piece, do they cut it? If someone wants to sell something worth 1,000 gold pieces, it's a security risk and it weighs a lot. So what can we do? So let's say entrepreneur, let's see, we did A, B, and so let's do entrepreneur C. He has an idea, let's say it's the irrigation ditch again, and he needs 300 gold pieces. So what we do is we lend him 300 gold pieces. So I have an asset, 300 gold piece loan to entrepreneur C. And instead of actually taking it out of my assets here and then waiting for it maybe for his laborers to redeposit it, I can just create a checking account for entrepreneur C. In fact, it can be maybe part checking, maybe part cash. What I could do is maybe 100 of it, I can make a checking account. 100, so it's an account for C, that's a checking account. And then the other 200, I could put some more banknotes outstanding. This is 200. Banknotes outstanding. So maybe I do 20, maybe he wants it in tens. 20 times. And I give him a bunch of these things that I printed out from the Bank of Sal. And then maybe he could use this to pay his laborers. And if the laborers later on, they don't want to just hold these pieces of paper, they can come back to the Bank of Sal and get gold in exchange for it. And then let's say another entrepreneur comes and he wants to build a factory. He needs 100 gold pieces. I can do is, say he needs 100 gold pieces. So I'll have a loan, 100 loan, that's my asset, loan to entrepreneur D, and then I can create a checking account for him. So this is account for D. And I know what you're thinking. It looks like I'm making money out of nowhere. I'm just increasing both the left and the right hand side of the balance sheet for every new loan I make. And if you think about it, this was actually not that different when we issued the gold. It's just that we had to wait for the gold to come back to the bank. This is essentially a way of keeping the gold here, and we just use these checking accounts and these banknotes as a way of transacting instead of the gold itself. So for example, let's say this entrepreneur D, he wants to build a factory. Let's say that person A is the person who actually builds the factory. So let's see, it's person D and I have person A. Person D can write person A a check. He could write 100. You know what a check looks like. He'll sign it. Person D, he'll say it's for a factory, and he'll write out 100 here. He'll write it out in words. However a check is, just something that shows it has to be authenticated so that when A takes it back to the bank believes that D actually wrote it in his checkbook as opposed to somehow A forging it. And in return, A is going to build D a factory. A is going to build D a factory. And then when A takes this check that he got from D, brings it back to the bank, then the bank's going to say, oh, okay, well, D is going to take all this money out of his account and we have to transfer it to A. So I could move that down, or I could just change it to A's color, and I think you get the point. All this 100 gold pieces is now A's. And once again, we did not have to change anything, or we didn't have to deal with any gold. Now the natural question is, how far can this process continue? Can a bank just continue issuing loans and checking accounts indefinitely and essentially collecting the difference in the interest between the interest it gets on the loan and the interest it gives on the checking account? Well, no, because then a bank would take on arbitrary amounts of risk, and there are regulations, although I think a bank would do it on their own to some degree, but there are regulations called reserve requirements that tell us how much lending can a bank do relative to its actual reserves. In this case, it's reserves of gold. Actually, even a better definition, how much checking accounts and banknotes it can issue relative to its reserves. And in the next video, the point of this video was showing you how this loan process can occur with the gold never leaving. In the next video, we'll actually talk about reserve requirements and think about why reserve requirements are what they are and what happens if in extreme circumstances. See you in the next video. In the last video, I gave the example of this bank that I keep using, and in this example, as opposed to giving the gold out to make loans and be used for projects and that gold get redeposited and then relent out, what we did in this example is that the bank, every time it made a loan, it just made a loan and that created an asset, and then it had a corresponding liability where the liability was either a checking account that the entrepreneur could use or bank notes, which are essentially cash, that the entrepreneur could use to pay their laborers or to buy their land or whatever they needed to do. So an obvious question was, how much could a bank do it? When does this stop? Can a bank just keep increasing the left and right hand sides of the balance sheets? And to answer this question, we'll introduce the idea of a reserve ratio. So just I guess a bit of a review and just make sure we're clearly reading this balance sheet. Let me label things a little bit more because sometimes I assume too much. Remember, these are the assets. The assets are all of these. Let me make a bold line here. All of this is the assets of this bank, including its building, so that's vault down there. And then the liabilities, I'll do that in this, maybe I'll do it in red. I don't like this red color, it's a little bright, but these are the liabilities over here, in this red color that I'm coloring in right now. And the equity, whoever owns the bank, whether stockholders or maybe it's owned by an individual, maybe it's owned by me, is what's left over. This is the, I'll do it in a nice neutral color. This is the equity. So the question is, how much can the bank, and of course this, let me do all of this words, liabilities. Liabilities. So the question is, how much can the bank continue to issue out more loans and increase its assets and its liabilities? Remember, every time it issued a loan, like for here, right here, it issued a 100 gold piece equivalent loan to D, and instead of giving D 100 gold pieces from, say, right here, it just created a checking account for D, which later D paid to A, and that's why it's labeled A right here. And let me relabel another thing, because the gold is different colors, just so you see the gold. This is the gold part of the assets. Let me make that very clear, that all of this right here is gold. Maybe I'll color it in a little bit. That's all gold, and there's 500 gold pieces. 500 gold pieces. So let's introduce the concept of a reserve ratio. Reserve ratio. Now let's think a little bit about what even a reserve is. A reserve is something that you keep aside because you might need it one day. Right? And in this situation, all of these liabilities, whether they're these bank notes outstanding in this example, or whether they're these checking accounts, these demand accounts, these are all liabilities that someone can come back to the bank on any given day and say, hey, I want my gold now. For whatever reason, maybe I'm leaving town, maybe I don't trust the bank anymore, for whatever reason, maybe they just want to make some jewelry. For whatever reason, that person wants their gold back. These are demand accounts. These checking accounts are demand accounts, and these notes are things that can be exchanged for gold at any point in time. And we talked a little bit about this earlier when we started the whole banking discussion, but you have to leave aside a little bit of gold just in case someone wants their gold back. So this amount of the gold that you have to leave aside as a reserve relative to the total amount of demands you have on that gold, that's the reserve ratio. So the reserve ratio, and in this situation, this world that we've created, the reserve store value is gold. Later on, we're going to get ourselves off of this gold system, and then that reserve store of value is actually going to turn into cash. But for right now, and I think it's easier actually to conceptualize gold, let's stick with gold. The reserve ratio is, for this bank, is the amount of gold assets. You won't see this formal definition anywhere because most people are off the gold standard right now. But it's the amount of gold assets divided by total, I don't want to say total liabilities, because the bank could take out loans that aren't demand loans. Everything on the liabilities right now are on-demand loans, which means whoever has that liability can come back and exchange it for gold at any moment in time. But the bank could have taken just a regular loan, and a regular loan might not be on demand. A regular loan might be a loan that the bank doesn't have to pay back for 10 years, and in which case there's no reason why the bank would have to set aside some gold to pay that back. So let's make our definition not total liabilities, but total demand liabilities. Total demand liabilities. Liabilities. Whoops, liabilities. So what would be total demand liabilities? That would be total banknotes in this case. And banknotes are also something we'll later leave a world where every bank is issuing banknotes. But I just wanted to give you that kind of historical context, how banknotes even started off. Total banknotes and demand accounts. Demand or checking accounts. Demand checking accounts. So let's see what it is for this bank that we have here. So our total gold assets are 500, and what's our total demand accounts? Let's see, so 100 plus 100 plus 100 plus 100. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 400, 600, and I think this was another 100 here, 700. So it equals, see, the total demand liabilities I just figured out was 700, and the gold assets in this bank are 500. 500. So right now the reserve ratio of this bank is pretty high, 5/7. So I don't know what 5/7 is. 5/7 is, I don't know, 7 goes into 5 how many times? 60, I'm doing my mental math right, it's about 62%. 7 goes into 50, no, 7 goes into 57 times. 7 times, so it's like 71%. Right, 7 times 7 is 49. 71%, so that's its reserve ratio. And what keeps banks from just keep issuing more assets and debts to expand its balance sheet is a reserve ratio requirement. So right now in the United States, although we're not on the gold standard, but you could imagine in this world, our bank regulators might say that your reserve ratio on demand accounts, so the amount of gold you have to set aside for checking accounts, so reserve requirement we'll call it. Let me change colors just to ease the monotony. Reserve requirement, they might say the reserve requirement is equal to, let's say they want to be safe. Let's say they want to make it 20%. In the U.S. right now it's 10%, although the reserve commodity isn't gold anymore. But let's say your reserve requirement is 20%. That means as long as at any given moment in time, more than 20% of these people don't demand their money back, the bank's going to have liquidity. The bank is going to be able to fulfill its promise. Because all of these people think at any given moment they can go to the bank and get their gold. And in order for this system to work, there has to be confidence. And in order for there to be confidence, the bank has to be good for it every time someone asks for their money. So the bank has to stay liquid. So essentially this reserve ratio is what the regulators think that a bank needs to maintain in order to be liquid. Our bank as it is right now, it has a reserve ratio of 71%. So as long as no more than 71% of these people, some of these loans, these might be out for a year or two. So as long as in that year or two that these loans are out, as long as no more than 71% of these people don't come asking for their gold, we should be okay. If all of a sudden, for whatever weird reason, I don't know, 80% of these people who have demand deposits or banknotes come and want to switch their money for gold, this bank is going to run out of gold, and that's a bank run. And there's a couple of reasons why that's really bad. One is, all of a sudden these demand deposit accounts all of a sudden don't seem to be that great because you're not really getting your gold on demand because more people are asking for gold than there is gold. And then the other problem is all of a sudden everyone will lose confidence in the system, and everyone's going to think, boy, these banks that have these nice vault-looking buildings, maybe they're not as safe as I thought, so everyone is going to start pulling their money out. and that's called a bank run. So in this example, if I assume that this loan is really worth 300 gold pieces and it's really going to be paid back, and this loan right here is really worth 100 gold pieces and it really will be paid back,